When Elena walked away from the glittering ballroom that night, she didn't cry. She simply went silent. The next morning, the world expected a scandal. Instead, her silence would deliver the most shocking revenge of all. If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because, tomorrow, I'll be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The chandelier light shimmered off crystal glasses and designer gowns, but Elena Brooks couldn't feel any of it. The sound of laughter, the same laughter that used to warm her heart, now sliced through her like glass. At the head of the long mahogany table sat her husband, Richard Brooks, billionaire investor and social darling of the New York elite. His hand rested casually on the arm of a woman who wasn't his wife. The woman's name was Chloe Moreau, a 28-year-old marketing executive who had once been Elena's mentee. Tonight, she was wearing the same emerald necklace Richard had given Elena on their 10th anniversary. It wasn't the betrayal itself that broke Elena, it was the performance. The way Richard laughed loudly, as though daring her to react. The way Chloe met her eyes and smiled like she'd won a prize. Elena didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply placed her glass of champagne on the tablecloth, folded her napkin, and whispered, "Enjoy the rest of your evening." Then she turned and walked out. Her heels clicked steadily against the marble floor, 3 slow beats that echoed through the hall and silenced the room. Outside, snow had started to fall, coating the city in white. The Brooks mansion loomed behind her, its windows glowing like eyes watching her leave. For 10 years, she had been the perfect wife, elegant, composed, fiercely loyal. Now, she was a ghost moving through her own life. When she reached the bedroom, she didn't pack or rage. She sat on the edge of the bed and unpinned her hair, strand by strand, as though peeling away her old self. By midnight, she was lying under the covers, wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed once, Richard's name. Then again. And again. She switched it off. That night, she made a vow. She would never give him the satisfaction of her pain. The house staff whispered outside her door, unsure what to do. Elena had never gone to bed without speaking to them, without asking about the next day's breakfast or the charity gala she'd planned for months. Now, her silence unsettled everyone. Downstairs, Richard tried to act unbothered, but his hands shook as he poured himself another drink. Chloe was gone. She'd slipped away when the murmurs began. Alone in his massive study, he replayed the look in Elena's eyes. It wasn't fury. It was finality. And somehow, that was worse. Upstairs, the clock ticked toward dawn. Elena lay perfectly still. She thought about the years she'd spent building his empire beside him, the deals she'd brokered, the parties she'd hosted, the foundation she'd run under his name. She realized how much of herself she had traded for his comfort. But not anymore. By sunrise, the mansion was quiet, too quiet. The staff peeked in to find Elena awake, sitting upright in bed, calm but distant. She looked different, serene, almost. When the housekeeper asked, "Shall I bring you breakfast?" Elena smiled faintly. "Yes, I'll come down in a little while." The words seemed harmless. But that morning, at the breakfast table, the silence she carried from that night would soon transform into something no one in that house, not even Richard, could have imagined. If someone betrayed you this deeply, would you choose silence or confrontation? Tell me in the comments what you think you would have done. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the warmth of buttered croissants and maple syrup. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, bathing the Brooks dining room in a golden glow. It should have been a peaceful morning, if not for the unspoken tension that clung to every inch of the air. Elena descended the staircase slowly, dressed not in one of her usual pastel silk robes but in a crisp white dress shirt, Richard's shirt. Her hair was brushed back neatly, her eyes unreadable. The staff froze at the sight of her. She hadn't spoken a word since last night's party. Richard looked up from the newspaper he wasn't really reading. He expected tears, accusations, maybe even a storm. What he got instead was composure, an eerie, deliberate calm that made him grip his cup tighter. "Morning," he said, his voice uncertain. Elena's response was a quiet nod as she took her seat at the long mahogany table opposite him. She didn't look angry. She looked resolved. The butler poured her coffee, his hands trembling slightly, unsure whether to speak. The silence was suffocating. The ticking clock on the wall sounded like a drumbeat. Finally, Elena broke the silence, not with an outburst, but with a simple statement that carried the weight of a hammer. "I've made some decisions." Richard looked up sharply. "About what?" She met his gaze for the first time. About my life. About this house. About us. Her tone was level, her hands steady on the coffee cup. I've realized something, Richard. I've spent 10 years building everything you wanted, your empire, your reputation, your image. And somewhere along the way, I stopped existing for myself. He tried to speak, but she lifted a hand, silencing him effortlessly. Don't. Not yet. You've said enough. Last night made that clear. Richard's jaw tightened. Elena, it was a mistake. Was it? She asked quietly, tilting her head. Because mistakes are accidental. That was a choice. And you made it in front of everyone. He flinched. Then, to everyone's surprise, Elena smiled, a soft, haunting smile that unsettled even the chef in the doorway. I used to believe silence meant weakness. But it doesn't. Sometimes silence is the only way to make people hear what they've ignored. She placed her napkin on the table and continued, You'll get a call later today. I've contacted the board. My shares in the company will be transferred, to me alone. I've also spoken with our lawyers about the foundation. It will no longer bear your name. Richard's eyes widened. You can't just. I already did, she interrupted gently. It wasn't vengeance that filled her voice, it was liberation. The power of someone who had nothing left to lose, and everything to reclaim. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed with disbelief, fear, admiration. Even Richard, the man who commanded boardrooms with his voice, found himself speechless. Elena took a slow sip of coffee, her gaze distant. Do you know what hurt me most, Richard? It wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing I had trained myself to accept less, to smile through disrespect. I don't blame Chloe. She's just a mirror of what I allowed. He leaned forward, desperate now. Elena, please. You're angry. You don't mean this. Angry. She gave a small laugh, one without joy. I was angry last night. Now I'm awake. She stood up. The sunlight caught her face just right, illuminating a serenity that unsettled him more than rage ever could. You can keep your money, Richard. I built enough of it myself. But what you can't keep is access to me. And then she said the line that would echo across the city's gossip columns for weeks. Enjoy your breakfast. It's the last one I'll ever make sure is served for you. With that, she turned and walked out, her steps measured, graceful. Every staff member in that room, each one who had whispered about the mistress, the betrayal, felt something shift. Respect, admiration, fear. When the front door closed, Richard sat there frozen, the coffee before him growing cold. He realized, too late, that the woman he thought he could humiliate had just ended his reign, not with scandal or screaming, but with silence. Hours later, the story had already begun spreading among Manhattan's elite. Elena Brooks walked out. Elena's taking the company. Elena's silent but lethal. But Elena wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. She was driving upstate, toward her grandmother's old estate, a quiet place by the lake, long abandoned since her youth. As the city faded behind her, she felt lighter with every mile. She didn't know what would come next, only that this was the first real morning of her new life. Do you think Elena's silence was strength or punishment? If you were in her shoes, would you walk away quietly, or burn it all down first? Share your thoughts in the comments. 3 days. That was all it took for Richard Brooks' carefully constructed empire to tremble. On the first morning after Elena's departure, the newspapers were still polite, calling it a private family matter. By the second day, headlines screamed across digital tabloids. Billionaire power couple split after gala scandal. Elena Brooks withdraws from joint holdings. Sources say she's done. By day 3, everyone wanted to know one thing. Where was she? Richard sat in his office at Brooks Capital, staring at a wall of muted TV screens all showing his face. He hadn't slept. Every phone call was another fire. Investors asking questions. The PR team demanding statements. Chloe calling. He didn't answer. He'd spent a decade believing that Elena was replaceable. That she was just a piece of his image, graceful, decorative, reliable. He never realized she was the reason people trusted him in the first place. Now, even his board members looked uneasy. Richard, one of them said carefully during an emergency meeting, the optics are unfortunate. The public adores her. They think she's taking back what's hers. Maybe you should apologize. Apologize. Richard snapped. For what? For having a personal life. The board member exchanged glances with the others. For underestimating your wife. Richard's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, he didn't know what to say. Meanwhile, 200 miles north, the world Elena had stepped into couldn't have been more different. The lake glimmered under the December sun. The house, her grandmother's old place, was still intact, though dust covered the windows. She spent the first 2 days cleaning, in silence, moving through the empty rooms like she was erasing the ghost of who she'd been. Her phone remained off. She hadn't spoken to anyone except the elderly caretaker who helped her find the keys. At night, she wrote in a small notebook, short sentences, fragments of clarity. I don't want revenge. I want peace. Maybe silence isn't withdrawal. Maybe it's protection. By the third morning, she walked barefoot down to the water, wrapped in a sweater. For the first time in years, she could hear nothing but wind and waves. And in that stillness, she smiled. She didn't know that across the internet, millions of women were already quoting her. Screenshots of her calm breakfast exit had gone viral. Someone from the mansion staff had leaked it. The world saw her not as a victim, but as something rarer, a woman who chose silence over spectacle. One comment stood out, written under a video clip. She didn't scream. She didn't post. She just left. That's power. In New York, Richard scrolled through those words late at night, sitting in his penthouse that suddenly felt too large. He couldn't stand the quiet anymore. Every sound, the refrigerator hum, the clock ticking, reminded him of the silence she'd weaponized against him. He tried calling again. No answer. He texted, Elena, please. Let's talk. Nothing. He didn't know she'd changed her number 2 days earlier. By the 5th day, a journalist cornered him outside his office. Mr. Brooks, is it true your wife has taken over the foundation in her name? Richard's jaw clenched. No comment. Is it also true she's been offered a publishing deal? He froze. What? The journalist smiled faintly. Her silence speaks louder than anything you could say. And just like that, Richard realized he was no longer the story. She was. Up by the lake, Elena received a letter in the mail. No name, just a return address from one of the foundation's former interns. Inside was a simple note. You taught me that being quiet doesn't mean being small. Thank you. She folded the note carefully, placed it in her notebook, and exhaled. For the first time, she let herself cry, not from pain, but release. That night, as snow began to fall again, she lit the fireplace and sat on the floor with her tea. She didn't know if she would ever go back to the city, or what her next step would be. But she knew one thing, her silence had already become a voice for others. Far away, Richard watched the same snowfall from his glass office, realizing that for the first time in his life, he had no control, and no one left to call. Sometimes walking away doesn't end the story. It starts a storm you never meant to create. Do you think Elena should stay silent and rebuild her life privately, or speak out publicly now that the world is watching? Tell me in the comments which path you'd choose. The snow had not stopped for 2 days. Up by the lake, the world looked frozen in time, white roofs, still water, smoke curling from Elena's chimney. She'd fallen into a rhythm of quiet mornings and long, healing nights. No news, no screens, no noise. Then, on the 7th morning, the sound of tires crunching through snow broke the silence. Elena looked up from her coffee, frowning. No one knew she was here. Through the frosted window, a black car appeared. The driver stepped out first, opening the back door. And then, Chloe emerged. For a moment, Elena thought she was hallucinating. The woman from that humiliating night stood outside her cabin, clutching her coat, eyes red from crying. Elena didn't move. She simply opened the door and waited. Why are you here? She asked, her voice even. Chloe hesitated. Because I couldn't live with it anymore. Snowflakes clung to her hair. He told me it was over between you 2 months ago. He said you were cold, that you didn't care. I believed him. I shouldn't have. Elena said nothing. Her face revealed nothing. Chloe swallowed. I thought I wanted his world, money, power, attention. But that night, when you left without saying a word, everyone looked at you like you were untouchable. I've never felt smaller. For the first time, Elena saw the fear behind the younger woman's arrogance. Chloe wasn't a villain. She was a mirror of who Elena had once been, desperate for validation from a man who gave none. Elena stepped aside. Come in before you freeze. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and tea. Chloe sat near the fireplace, eyes flicking to the shelves of books, the half-finished painting on the easel. You really left everything. Yes, Elena said. Everything that didn't feel like mine anymore. Chloe stared into the fire. His unraveling, you know. He calls me your name sometimes. Elena gave a small, sad smile. That's not love. That's a habit. For a long while, they just listened to the fire crackle. Then Chloe whispered, I'm sorry. Elena looked at her, not with pity, but understanding. I don't need your apology, but you should give one to yourself. Chloe blinked back tears. What are you going to do now? Elena poured more tea. I haven't decided. Maybe build something small. Quiet. For women who forget how strong they are until silence reminds them. Chloe nodded slowly. If you ever need help. Elena met her eyes. Live better. That's enough help. When Chloe left, the snow had stopped. The world outside shimmered, cleansed. That night, Elena finally opened her laptop. Thousands of unread emails flooded the screen. Publishers, journalists, women from every continent writing to thank her. One subject line caught her attention. A proposal to turn your silence into a platform. She clicked it open. The email came from Dr. Lila Navarro, a psychologist who ran a women's advocacy network. You don't have to speak to be heard, the message read. Sometimes the world needs to see what stillness looks like. Let's create something together, the Still Foundation. Elena sat back, heartbeat steady. Maybe this was what her silence had been leading her toward, not isolation, but impact. She closed the laptop, smiling faintly. For the first time, her silence wasn't empty, it was full of direction. Sometimes the person you think destroyed you becomes the reason you rebuild. Would you have let Chloe in, or shut the door forever? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. Spring crept slowly into the mountains. The snow around the lake began to melt, revealing patches of soft green and the first hints of life returning. Inside the cabin, Elena's mornings were now filled with motion again, emails answered, sketches for a new logo, phone calls with Dr. Navarro. They had named it the Still Foundation, a place for women to rebuild after betrayal, burnout, or silence. It started small, an online circle, a few workshops, but word spread faster than either of them expected. Within weeks, reporters began referring to her as the woman who turned silence into power. Elena didn't chase fame, she just worked. Every story she read reminded her of a piece of herself she had left behind. She felt useful again, whole again. Sometimes, when she walked by the lake at dusk, she would whisper a thank you, to the night she walked out, to the silence that had saved her. Meanwhile, in New York, Richard watched from afar. He kept pretending to be busy, charity dinners, investor calls, but the emptiness was louder now. His empire hadn't fallen, but the respect had shifted. During a live interview on a financial network, the host asked him bluntly, "Your ex-wife's foundation is being called one of the most influential new movements of the year. Do you regret how things ended?" For a heartbeat, he couldn't speak. Cameras caught the flicker of truth in his eyes. "I regret not listening," he finally said. That clip went viral overnight. 2 months later, a letter arrived at Elena's new office, simple stationery, her name written in familiar handwriting. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. "Elena, there's not much I can say that matters. You found strength in silence. I'm still learning how to sit with mine. Congratulations on what you're building." Ah. She folded it once and placed it in the drawer. No bitterness. No nostalgia. Just a quiet acceptance that some chapters close without applause. The Foundation's first in-person retreat took place that summer. 50 women gathered by the lake, artists, doctors, single mothers, executives. Elena stood before them, nervous at first, then steady. "I thought silence was the end of my story," she said softly. "But it was just the space where I finally heard my own voice." Applause filled the air, gentle, genuine. From a distance, she saw a familiar figure standing under the trees. Richard. He didn't approach, only watched for a moment, eyes glistening, before turning back toward the road. Elena smiled faintly and continued speaking. There was nothing left to say between them. That evening, she sat alone by the fire pit as the guests laughed behind her. The sky turned violet, stars flickering one by one. She whispered to herself, "Peace isn't loud. It's earned." And in that moment, the woman who once walked away from a table in silence realized she had never stopped speaking. She had just changed her language. Have you ever discovered your voice by walking away? If you've ever rebuilt after silence, tell your story in the comments. Someone might need to hear it today. It had been almost a year since Elena left New York. The Still Foundation was thriving, its quiet influence rippling through podcasts, articles, and late-night talk shows. Elena rarely appeared in public. She preferred to let the work speak for her. But when the organization received its first major humanitarian award, she agreed, reluctantly, to attend the ceremony. The ballroom glittered under gold chandeliers. Cameras flashed. The same city that once whispered about her was now applauding her. Dr. Navarro leaned over and whispered, "You don't have to say much, just thank them." Elena nodded, fingers tightening around her note cards. She hadn't stood behind a microphone since that night of betrayal. As she stepped on stage, the audience rose. The applause swelled, warm and relentless. She smiled, poised. "Thank you," she began. "I once believed silence was weakness. But silence, when chosen, can be strength. It gives you time to listen to yourself." The crowd hushed, hanging on her words. She looked out, and froze. At the edge of the room, near the exit, stood Richard. Older, thinner, no entourage, no arrogance, just a man watching the woman he'd once broken. Elena's breath caught. For a split second, the world blurred into that single image, him in the shadows, her in the light. She forced herself to continue. When Elena disappeared, New York didn't stop, it simply shifted. At first, tabloids chased her name like a ghost. "Where is Elena Brooks?" screamed the headlines. Paparazzi swarmed the mansion gates. But within weeks, the noise faded, replaced by new scandals, new faces. At her husband's parties, people spoke her name only in whispers, as though she were an uncomfortable memory. "Such a shame," one guest sighed, sipping champagne. "Beautiful woman. Too sensitive for this world," another murmured. Richard pretended not to hear. Yet every morning, when he sat at the vast breakfast table, the silence in her empty chair grew louder. He would reach for his phone, open a message thread still named E, type something meaningless. "How are you? Are you eating?" Then delete it before hitting send. For the first time in his empire of noise, silence began to haunt him too. In the cabin by the lake, Elena's world was stripped bare. No assistants, no staff, just her and the raw quiet of her own thoughts. Each night, she sat by the fire with pen and paper. She began writing a letter she knew she would never send. "Richard, I thought I would scream when I left. But the silence has been louder than I ever imagined. It doesn't hurt the way I thought it would. It's heavier, but purer. I finally hear the truth between us. We were a noise that drowned itself." She stopped there, folded the page, and tucked it between the pages of her old journal. Days turned into weeks. The pain didn't vanish, it just softened, like waves smoothing sharp stones. She started painting again, cooking small meals, opening the curtains without flinching. And one morning, she caught her reflection in the window, barefaced, unguarded, alive. "You're still here," she whispered. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Months later, a local journalist tracked her down, not to exploit, but to understand. He found her sweeping snow from her porch, hair in a loose braid, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Mrs. Brooks, the world thinks you vanished. May I ask why?" Elena leaned on her broom, thoughtful. "Because silence doesn't sell papers," she said. "But sometimes, it saves lives." The next week, an article appeared. "The Billionaire's Wife Who Chose Silence." The piece went viral, not as gossip, but as gospel. Women wrote letters, thanking her for giving quiet dignity a voice. She read them all, one by one, tears wetting the paper. In those words, Elena realized something new. Her silence was no longer just her refuge. It had become a language other women could understand. That was the moment the world began reaching for her again, and one unexpected knock at her door would soon change everything. "I didn't come here to prove anyone wrong," she said softly. "I came to thank the silence that saved me, and every woman who's learning she doesn't have to scream to be heard." Applause thundered. Cameras flashed again. When she glanced back, Richard was gone. The next morning, her assistant burst into the office, pale. "Richard Brooks, he collapsed at a conference last night. Heart attack." Elena felt the world tilt. "Is he?" "He's alive. Intensive care." For a long moment, Elena stared out the window, the city skyline hazy in spring light. She felt nothing at first, no anger, no relief. Just an old ache resurfacing. Dr. Navarro found her later, quiet in her office. "You don't owe him anything," she said gently. "I know," Elena replied. "But I think I need to see him, not for him. For me." The hospital smelled of antiseptic and rain. She walked through the corridors unseen, hat low, sunglasses on. In the dim room, Richard lay asleep, tubes in his arm, monitors blinking steadily. He looked fragile, human in a way she had never seen. She pulled the chair close and sat today. I used to think you took everything from me, she whispered. But maybe you just showed me what I needed to find. His eyes opened slightly. Elena. She smiled faintly. Rest. I'm not here to stay. He tried to speak, but she pressed a finger to her lips. Sure. It's all right. For a long moment, neither spoke. Just the soft hum of machines. Then she stood, brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, and said the words she'd never thought she would. I forgive you. And she left before he could answer. Outside, the rain had stopped. She tilted her face toward the sky, breathing in the wet air. Forgiveness didn't mean return, it meant release. Back at the foundation, she walked straight into a meeting, composed and radiant. Let's expand the retreat program, she said. There are more women waiting to find their stillness. Her team watched her, inspired. None of them knew she had just closed the last door of her past. Would you have gone to see him? Do you believe forgiveness is for the betrayer, or for the one who was betrayed? Share your thoughts below. Your story might help someone find their peace. 2 weeks after Elena's quiet visit, a thick envelope arrived at the foundation's office. No return name, just her address written in that same careful script. She hesitated before opening it. Inside was a legal document and a single handwritten page. The document transferred the remaining half of the Brooks Charitable Trust to the Still Foundation. The letter read, Elena, they tell me recovery will be long. I may not have that time. I wanted to leave something that mattered, not a name on a building, but a bridge back to the good we once tried to build. You saw value where I only saw victory. Keep doing that. Elena read it twice. Her hand trembled, not from grief, but from the strange weight of closure. She called Dr. Navarro into her office. He gave us the trust, Elena said quietly. Dr. Navarro's eyes widened. Are you sure you want to accept it? Elena looked at the letter again. Yes, because it's not his anymore, it's what's left of what was good. Weeks later, during the Foundation's next retreat, she shared the story, not the scandal, just the lesson. There's power in walking away, she told the women sitting around the fire, but there's greater power in walking forward without hatred. Sometimes forgiveness isn't agreement, it's letting the past stay where it belongs. The group fell silent. The lake glowed under the moonlight. Elena gazed at their faces and thought of the girl she had been, polished, composed, terrified of being alone. That woman no longer existed. In her place stood someone unshakable. A few days later, she visited the city for the first time in months. The air smelled of rain on the pavement, and the skyline shimmered like a memory. She didn't go near the old mansion. She walked straight to the Foundation's new headquarters, a renovated library funded by the Trust. A plaque by the entrance read simply, For those who found their voice in stillness. Elena traced the words with her fingertips, smiling. No names, no history, just purpose. That evening, alone in her apartment overlooking the city, she lit a candle by the window. Thank you, she whispered, to silence, to endings, to everything that had brought her here. And for the first time, her heart was completely, perfectly quiet. Would you have accepted his gift, or sent it back? What would forgiveness look like for you if the person who hurt you tried to make amends? Tell me in the comments below. Someone else might find their own stillness through your answer. It was a gray Sunday morning when the call came. Mrs. Brooks, a familiar voice asked. This is Victor's assistant. We're finalizing the memorial breakfast next week. He requested you be there. Elena froze. Memorial? Yes, his condition declined last night. He passed away peacefully at home. She didn't speak for a moment. After all the chaos, all the pain, peace sounded like both a mercy and an ache. The following Sunday, she went. Not for the world to see, but for the man she had once loved. The event was held at their old estate, now converted into a family trust venue. The same dining room where silence had once been her shield was now filled with murmurs and clinking china. Dozens of people, former employees, business partners, even the same gossiping socialites, had gathered around the long mahogany table. When Elena entered, whispers began again. But this time, she didn't shrink. She wore a simple cream dress, no diamonds, no armor, just herself. At the head of the table sat an empty chair with a folded napkin. On the plate lay a single white rose. A young man in a navy suit, the new chairman, stood up. Before he passed, Mr. Brooks requested one final tradition be observed, he said. He asked that Mrs. Elena Brooks take the first seat at this table. Every eye turned to her. She hesitated, then slowly walked forward and sat in the chair meant for her. The room was utterly silent. The chairman handed her a letter. He wanted you to read this, if you were willing. Elena opened it. The handwriting was weak but unmistakable. Elena, I once built a world where money spoke louder than truth. You taught me that silence can be stronger than any voice when it comes from dignity, not fear. I betrayed you because I mistook power for love. But even in my failure, you showed grace. The world will call it a scandal. I call it my lesson. If you're reading this, please take your place at the table again. Not as my wife, but as the woman who taught me what worth really means. Eat. Live. And may the silence you kept become peace for us both. Victor. For the first time in years, Elena smiled through tears. She looked around the room and saw them all differently. These people who once watched her crumble now watched her rise. She placed the letter beside the rose, then lifted her glass. To peace, she said quietly. The crowd echoed her words. For the first time since the betrayal, the breakfast table didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like closure. As the morning sun streamed through the tall windows, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Freedom without loneliness. She wasn't the woman who went silent out of pain anymore. She was the woman who had learned that silence could also mean power. And when she finally stood to leave, she turned back once, just once, to the table that had held her heartbreak and her rebirth. Goodbye, Victor, she whispered. Thank you for listening, at last. Have you ever been in a room that once broke you, but this time, you walked out stronger? Tell me in the comments what that moment looked like for you. Your story might help someone else find their own peace. Months passed. Seasons turned. The mansion that once echoed with luxury and loneliness now stood quiet, a historical landmark owned by the Still Foundation. The board had transformed its once private gardens into a public retreat for women rebuilding their lives. Every morning, sunlight poured through the same windows where Elena once hid behind drawn curtains. Now, that light fell on women laughing over coffee, learning to dream again. And every year, on the anniversary of Victor's passing, Elena came back, not to mourn, but to plant a single white rose beneath the oak tree by the terrace. On a warm spring morning, she arrived with her friend Dr. Navarro. The ground smelled of jasmine and rain. You really made it beautiful, Dr. Navarro said, looking around. Elena smiled. It's what it should have been all along, a place for starting over. They reached the oak tree. Elena knelt, pressed the flower into the soil, and whispered. For every woman who thought silence was the end, it's only the beginning. That afternoon, she sat by the lake, a journal open in her lap. She wrote quietly. I learned that silence can be survival. But peace is the sound that comes after. And love. It's not what someone gives you, it's what you learn to give yourself after everything breaks. She closed the notebook and exhaled. The air was still, but inside her, there was music, soft, steady, alive. Later, she returned to the foundation's office. A young intern named Tessa shyly approached her. Mrs. Brooks. Elena looked up, smiling. Elena, please. I just wanted to say, your story saved me. I thought silence meant weakness. Now I see it can mean strength. Elena placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Then make sure yours becomes a voice for someone else. Tessa nodded, teary-eyed. And in that small exchange, Elena understood the final miracle. She had not just rebuilt her own life, she had created a way for others to do the same. That night, as the city lights shimmered in the distance, Elena stood by her window. She didn't need a mansion, a name, or a table full of eyes watching her anymore. All she needed was the peace of knowing she had survived and turned her silence into something eternal. The world could talk all it wanted. But she had learned the truth. Real power doesn't need to shout, it simply stays. If you were in Elena's place, would you ever forgive someone who betrayed you, or would you walk away and never look back? Let me know in the comments. Your answer might give someone else courage to start again. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's just as powerful and unpredictable. So don't leave yet. Click on the video showing on your screen right now to watch the next story.